Casey Anthony has been referred to as one of the most hated mothers in America. 22-year-old Casey Anthony took 31 days, a full month, before reporting her 2-year-old baby missing. The controversy revolving this case is shocking, and I want to know what you guys have to say. This takes place in Orlando, Florida. On the night of July 15th, 2008, police receive a 911 call from someone named Cindy Anthony. She's pretty frantic, and she's calling to report that her 22-year-old daughter Casey has stolen her car. 30 minutes later, Cindy calls back even more frantic than last time to report that her granddaughter, 2-year-old Caylee Anthony, has been missing for 31 days. She hangs up, calls back, and says, quote, "My daughter finally admitted that the babysitter stole her." She tells police that she needs help in finding her and proceeds to say, quote, "There's something wrong. I found my daughter's car today and it smells like there's been a dead body in the car." It is currently July 15th. Cindy says that she has not seen Caylee since June 7th, so let's go back to June. Casey Anthony lived at home with her parents Cindy and George, along with her 2-year-old daughter Caylee. The parents absolutely adored both Casey and Caylee. They were really loving parents and grandparents. They basically helped raise Caylee. Early in June, Casey had told them that she was going to be traveling for work for around a month and she was going to be taking Caylee with her. Throughout the time that Casey and Caylee were gone, the parents would call checking in, asking to speak to Caylee, but they never did because Casey said she was always busy either playing or in the shower or occupied with the babysitter, so she couldn't come to the phone and say hi. In July, Casey's father was notified that his car had been abandoned, found, and towed, and he had to go retrieve it, which left him and Cindy really confused because that was a car that Casey was meant to be using during this month of travel with her and Caylee. George got the car back the morning of those 911 calls, and it was concerning for many reasons, but a big one being the foul smell that was coming from the trunk of the car. George was a former homicide detective himself, and he recognized the smell that was coming from the car as the smell of human decomposition, leading him to tell his wife, who later made that 911 phone call. Casey Anthony had been staying with her boyfriend 2 hours away in Tampa without a worry in the world. Her parents had to drive to Tampa, pick her up, bring her back home to explain what in the world was going on. She admits to her parents that the nanny had taken Caylee and that she had not seen her for the last 31 days. She said the reason she didn't report it to the police is because she thought she could figure it out herself. Casey's story is that on June 9th, she worked a shift at her place of work, Universal Studios. For work, she dropped Caylee off with her nanny called Zanny the nanny. Zanny the nanny just never gave her back. Casey says she's just been holding her hostage and nobody knows where they are. From the very first conversation that Casey had with authorities, the first thing they all noticed was the lack of concern, the lack of urgency, the lack of care, really. But at the beginning, I guess they had to give her the benefit of the doubt. Investigators start by investigating this Zanny the nanny. Who is she? They go to her apartment where Casey used to drop off Caylee with Zanny. They get the address from Casey, but when they get there, the apartment is vacant, and the landlord says the apartment has been vacant for almost 6 months. The apartment complex also had absolutely no records of anyone named Zanny ever living there, making that the first lie that came from Casey to the police, which was a very weird thing. The next day, Casey is showing investigators her place of work, Universal Studios, where she was working when Caylee was with a nanny. She walks them through the entire building, giving the officers a tour of the place. And when they get to the very end of the hallway, the very back of the building, Casey turns around and she looks at officers and she laughs. She says, "I don't actually work here. I actually haven't worked here for 2 years." What? That's lie number 2. Her lies, by the way, are only increasing the suspicion on her, and it's making police officers and investigators know that she is not someone that they can trust. Casey gets arrested at Universal Studios for suspicion of neglect, making false statements, and obstructing the investigation. By this point, also, police officers are able to find a lady named Zanny that was a nanny, but she had no idea who Casey was, who Caylee was. She had never heard of them. They had never ever been in contact, and Casey's friends also confirmed Caylee never even had a nanny. Investigators sit Casey down, and they tell her, quote, "Everything you tell us is a lie. If the main thing you want to do is find your daughter and you don't think lying to us is going to help us find her, then why would you do that?" Casey's response is that she's just scared of never seeing her daughter again. When Casey's taken into custody, she gets one phone call and she uses that one phone call to call her mom, Cindy. Cindy had been on TV making public appeals for Caylee's safe return, begging the public to come forward if they knew anything to help her find Caylee. When Casey called her, she was livid that her mom had been doing that to help her find her daughter, mind you. She talks to her mother in an extremely rude way. Her mom hands the phone to her best friend, Christina. Christina proceeds to beg Casey to please let them know if she knows something about Caylee's disappearance. Casey gets so angry. She She's so mad that her loved ones are trying to help her find her daughter, and she calls that phone call a massive waste. Casey is denied bond. She's ordered to stay in police custody up until her trial, and by this point, this case was massive. It was all over the news. All of America was aware and looking for Caylee. Her face was all over social media, TV, magazines, everywhere. A little bit over a week of her being in jail, her parents visit her, and her behavior during that meeting was so strange. Cindy and George were supportive, of course, and Casey's behavior is so, I want to say, unstable. She's excited to see her parents, but she doesn't really care, and she acts extremely uninterested when they're telling her all about the search efforts. She gets angry and bothered when she learns that certain people are involved in the search and helping look for Caylee. She's laughing about the food that she's been eating in jail. She says that she hasn't been crying, just trying to distract herself. And one of the most noticeable things to me is that she does not get emotional when they're talking about Caylee. The only times that she cries or looks like she's crying is when they're talking about her, not her daughter. She also would refer to Caylee in past tense, but then she would correct herself and say whatever she was saying in present tense. It's almost as though she knew that Caylee was never going to come home. It was noticeable and strange. Her parents ask her, "What is your gut telling you?" And Casey responds and says, "My gut is telling me that she's close. I know in my heart that she is not far." Casey hires Jose Baez to be her lawyer. Jose is a really good lawyer. He's known for being involved in some really high-profile criminal cases. He has a reputation for being able to get big criminals out of their charges. August 21st, Casey is released from jail. Some anonymous, very rich guy paid her bond that was $500,000. However, it wouldn't be long until she was rearrested, this time for the murder of her daughter. In August, a meter reader, his name was Roy Kronk, he worked in the area of Anthony's residence, and on shift, he would sometimes go into a wooded area if he had to use the bathroom. And one of the times that he did, he noticed something suspicious by the tree. It looked like a bag. Something looked weird about it, so he reported it to police and asked that they come and look at the bag. But when Roy went back a month later, the bag was still there, and he called police over and over again asking for them to come out and pick up this bag, and they never found it or didn't do anything about it. It was not until December 11th, 2008 where he saw the bag again, and finally he thought, well, if they're not going to come look at it, then I'm going to take a look inside the bag myself. He opens the bag and starts poking around with a stick, and he finds human bones. Police finally come, they take the bag, take it back to a lab where they found child's bones wrapped in a Winnie the Pooh blanket. The skull still had a strap of duct tape placed on it, painting a very, very sinister picture of what must have happened to that little child. Eventually, the bones and remains were confirmed to be that of 2-year-old Caylee Anthony. The death was ruled a homicide, and the cause of death was listed as undetermined. This was horrible news. It was the news that the family did not want, the news that Caylee's grandparents were terrified to be confirmed, and they were devastated by it. Casey's father, Caylee's grandfather, George, was so heartbroken that he couldn't take it anymore. He wanted to go be with Caylee. Shortly after finding out the horrible news, George tried to unalive himself. Luckily, he was found and taken to a hospital before he could, but that is truly heartbreaking. It's devastating. George and Cindy Anthony were able to lay Caylee to rest, and the funeral was attended by so many people that were heartbroken, who loved and cared for little Caylee. The investigation continues. Casey's car is taken in for evidence, and in the trunk of the car, they found hair that they believed to belong to Caylee. The hair they found had signs of being attached to a deceased human body. They were also somehow able to test the air in the trunk of the car, and it was confirmed that the air had compounds of human decomposition, and that the foul smell that was coming from the trunk of the car was human remains. In the air of the trunk, they also found shockingly high levels of chloroform. The duct tape that was found on the skull also proved to be a match to duct tape found in the Anthony home. On Casey's laptop, they found Google searches on suffocation, neck breaking, foolproof suffocation, and over 80 searches on how to make chloroform yourself. In Casey's diary, entries she had written after Caylee was already missing were telling, to say the least. I'm going to read one of those entries for you. It says, quote, "I have no regrets, just a bit worried. I just want for everything to work out okay. I completely trust my own judgment. I know that I have made the right decision. I just hope that the end justifies the means. I just want to know what the future will hold for me. I guess I will soon see. This is the happiest that I have been in a very, very long time." And it did seem like in the month that her daughter was missing and the world did not know yet, Casey was extremely happy. She was out every single night, partying with friends, making new friends, having the time of her life, doing everything but looking for her missing daughter. It is believed by a lot of people that because Casey had Caylee when she was 20 years old, she grew to have a lot of resentment for Caylee because her fun years were cut short because she was now a mother. She had someone to care for. She had responsibilities, and now she didn't want to have those anymore. She didn't want to be a mother anymore. She wanted to get rid of Caylee because she wanted to go out and have fun without thinking of her daughter back at home. Casey Anthony's trial began May 24th of 2011. The prosecution starts off by saying, "We are sure that Casey Anthony premeditatedly planned and executed the murder of her daughter." They announced if she was to be found guilty, they would be seeking the death penalty. They were going to be fighting to prove that Casey used chloroform on Caylee to make her pass out, suffocated her, wrapped her body in that Winnie the Pooh blanket, kept her body in the trunk of the car for up to 3 days before finally disposing of it in that wooded area. We know that Caylee Anthony lost her life to homicide because her human remains were found. We know that she was last seen in the care of her mother, Casey Anthony. And there was a period of 31 days where Caylee was not seen by anyone. The issue the prosecution would run into is being able to prove 100% that Casey did this. They needed hard evidence that directly tied Casey to the death of Caylee to be able to say confidently and without reasonable doubt that Casey was responsible. And they did not have that. All they had was circumstantial evidence. But because of how the case had played out, the evidence that they did have and the fact that Casey showed her true colors, which were those of a liar, they thought that she would be found guilty, obviously, as did the public. However, Casey Anthony's lawyer, Jose Baez, was going to make sure that that did not happen. The defense led by Jose presented what they thought happened: that Caylee drowned in the family pool and that George, Casey's father, covered up the drowning in order to save his daughter. He knew that there was a chance if people found out if she did drown in the pool, that Casey would be called a bad mother and that she would be blamed for this, and George was not going to let that happen. Therefore, George decided to cover it up. That's the defense's story, that George found Caylee no longer alive in the pool and that he himself, a retired homicide detective, let's not forget that, left and disposed of her body. To defend Casey's behavior and her character, Jose further said that the reason that Casey acted the way she did was in result of that she had allegedly suffered at the hands of her brother and her father when she was a child. Jose did his best. He put all of his energy into making George Anthony seem like he was the one in the wrong. He claimed that starting from when Casey was 8 years old, she suffered SA at the hands of her father for years, and that day in court, that exact day, was the first time that anyone heard of that. Casey also said that her father, George, did the same things that he did to her when she was a child to Caylee. This had never ever been mentioned, thought, believed ever by anyone until it came out of Jose Baez's mouth. And Jose claimed that because Casey was taught to lie at a very young age, this is why she had her lying issue now as an adult. That is disgusting, it's sick, it's twisted, and it is so extremely calculated. I guess we don't know if that happened, right? And we always want to believe that we would believe a victim if they came out and said that this had happened to them. But there's absolutely zero proof of any of that happening, and how convenient was that timing? So I just want to say, George as well as Cindy had revolved their entire life around Caylee from the moment she was born. They cared for her and loved her so much the same way that they cared and loved for their daughter Casey. And their hearts had been breaking over and over again throughout the last 3 years since this all started, so much so that George didn't even see a point in living without Caylee anymore. For his own daughter to say that she was traumatized from her childhood with horrible claims and allegations against her own father, to paint him out to be this monster in front of the world is disgusting. If that whole story was made up, which a lot of people believe it to be, that is the most savage, disgusting, devastating thing I've ever heard. And if Casey did make that up, whether it was her idea or Jose's, to be able to sit there and look at her father in court and say that, that is evil. Casey's mom, Cindy, was called up to the stand by the defense, and I'm not sure why, but it almost seemed like she was standing up for Casey. She kind of almost said that she may have been responsible for some of those Google searches, but that didn't really make sense because she was at her place of work when those searches were made back at home on their home computer. On July 5th of 2011, the jury found Casey Anthony not guilty. Not guilty on first-degree murder, not guilty of aggravated manslaughter of a child, not guilty of aggravated abuse. The only thing that she was found guilty of was providing false information to the police. And because Casey was in police custody since October of 2008, she had received more than 1,000 days in time served credit. So after trial, she went to prison for 10 days. Only 10 days, and she was released on July 17th, free to go. Casey since then has cut off all contact with her family. It is unbelievable. This is one of the most well-known cases out there. I need to know what your opinions are on it. That's all I have, but thank you guys for spending time with me today. I love you so much. I hope you've had the best day ever. A massive kiss on the forehead to every single one of you.